Okay. So, um, it's been 2 days um, since the George Floyd incident, and I have held my tongue just out of respect for him and how touchy the situation is. Um, I've been asked by a lot of people what I think about the situation, and if I'm being honest, I tried to kind of take some time um, to take a look at it. And being a police officer for almost 7 years, I know all too well that what I see on the news or the accounts that claim to be the truth or um, the true story most oftentimes are not the whole story. But because a man died, um, and it was at the hand of police officers, um, it makes this such a touchy situation. So I just wanted to be slow to speak. Um, I also don't get anything out of this. I'm not promoting anything, and I have found that a lot of people that are jumping on this on social media, the loudest voices usually have a book that they're writing or, you know, have something to gain from the popularity of this story. So I just wanted to take some time so as not to capitalize on that. But I do want to give kind of my perspective. I have a lot of people that have been asking me about the situation with George Floyd. And I think the reason for that is that I was a police officer, but I think it's easier for them to ask me now that I'm not a police officer. I resigned in 2018, and it's been 2 years this month. Almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years next month that I resigned. And so I feel like people feel like I'm distanced enough from the police department to ask me and expect a unbiased opinion. Because this is a loaded topic. And people who ask a police officer about a police officer murdering somebody, it's volatile and it is kind of a dangerous question to ask. And so I realize people aren't comfortable with it. But I have some close friends and family that have asked me. And so I know that people are wondering what I'm thinking. And so I just wanted to kind of give my perspective 2 days out of the incident. I will say that I do not know the facts of the case. All I know is what is being reported, and so I'm going to address the things that I see and read and hear from the media. I'm not going to assume that there's outside circumstances in my responses. I'm not going to add additional influences to the story. I'm just going to go off of what is being reported. I will say that there's always more to the story, but that doesn't mean that your perception or perspective right now is wrong. It could totally be right. You could make an accurate assessment of what happened now and be right, but you could also be wrong. So I just want to make that clear. until we see the reports and the extra video, and I'm sure there's things that haven't been released, we won't know the complete extent of it. But I think we do know enough from the video to make some type of assessment. And I don't want to make this too sterile because a man lost his life. And life is important, and I never think that you should take anyone's life unless you're saving a life. And in this case, it appears like George Floyd was no longer a threat when his life was taken, if he was a threat. I guess George Floyd was addressed by police officers who were responding to some type of a forgery type case in progress. And when they responded to the scene, they found him driving a vehicle, or at least in the driver's seat of a vehicle in Minneapolis. And I didn't see video of him in a car. I didn't see video of him seated. I didn't see him outside of the car except for on the ground in the prone position. What appears to be handcuffed. I can't see his hands, but I don't see his hands moving, so I'm assuming he's cuffed or detained somehow. And I see a police officer with his knee on the back of the neck of the man on the ground, which I'm assuming is George Floyd. So I don't know what happened between the time there was the stop and him being on the ground. But what's being reported is that there was some type of a resistance, whether it was resisting arrest or it was just resisting investigation. I'm not sure. But there's also reports that he may have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs. But I don't know that. What I do know is that he was conscious in the beginning of the video that I watched where he was on the ground and he was saying that he couldn't breathe and he was pleading for the officer to get off of him. It's a really horrible video to watch. I hate watching videos like that. I did skip some parts of the video because I just wanted to... It was a long video and I will watch the video, but I didn't want to be emotional about this. I just want to kind of look at the facts, which is he was moving and breathing in the beginning, and by the end he wasn't. And the officer did not change his position with his knee on the back of the neck. So I do know that I did hear people in the video saying that he was choking him or that he was going to kill him and to get off of him, and I heard people pleading with the officers that were standing by, the beat partners of the officer that was engaging George Floyd. They were talking to the officers and telling them to stop him. And the officer didn't stop him. That's what I saw in the video. And so there's multiple things that are happening here. I do know that there is body cameras. It's reported that there's body cameras, so I'm sure more will come out. But, from what I have right now, I'm just going to make an assessment from my point of view, my perspective of what happened. Because I've seen a lot as a police officer. I've seen people do good things. I've seen people do bad things. I've seen people do the best things, and I've seen people do the worst things. And so I understand the best and the worst of people. So I'm not surprised anymore when someone does something really, really amazing and heroic, because I would see it all the time. Most of the time on the police department, I would see police officers do amazingly heroic things. And there was a lot of police officers that did amazing heroic things for me, to save me, to help me. My beat partner, Moku Brune, put himself in danger a lot of times for me and standing up for me. And he also would do that for people that needed help, for victims and for people that were being bullied or people that were being taken advantage of. And so I've seen really amazing things. And I've seen bystanders help the police when they were trying to catch someone who was dangerous and appeared dangerous, and they put their lives on the line. And I've also seen horrible things happen. I've seen, parents kill their kids, and uncles kill their nephews, and rapes, and horrible things, stabbings. And so I'm not surprised anymore. But you always feel it. But as a police officer, you don't feel it in the moment. Most of the time. Because you enter this zone, this mindset, this kind of state of mind that you have to protect while you're working, because you have to operate. And the thing about police officers is that when everyone else freezes and doesn't know what to do and panics or runs away, the police officer has to be able to engage and to think clearly and to process and to make calculations and to make decisions based on the law and based on policy and safety. The police officer's number one goal is to protect life. And that's what makes this case so sad. So I don't have to qualify any more statements. That was it. That's all I had to say about that. Now moving on to what I saw. I did see a man who seemed to be detained and no longer a threat to life. He was handcuffed and under control. And even if he was not completely under control, oftentimes what'll happen is if you have a position of advantage over somebody, it may seem unfair, or they may be in some pain or some type of pain compliance, like putting your knee on their back when you're trying to get control of them. But if you were to let them up, they would be a real risk, especially if they're bigger than you. I've had to leave my knee on someone's back until I had backup, because even though they were handcuffed, they were fighting and could hurt themselves by running into a roadway or run away with handcuffs on them. And in Hawaii, where I was a police officer, there's water everywhere. And so a lot of times it's to protect them. But there were times where people, whether if they were on drugs or they were just hysterical, they would still be a danger if they were allowed to get up. Oftentimes they were very strong. And I did have one suspect who died on me. He didn't die at the time that I was with him, but he died later in the hospital. And I was the last person really to see him alive, or at least conscious. It was early in my career, and he was on drugs, and he was hysterical, and his heart rate was very high, and he was not reasonable, and he was fighting, and he was combative. And I detained him with handcuffs and leg shackles, and then immediately called for an ambulance because I knew he was in a state that was dangerous for him. His heart rate was super high and he was breathing heavy. We called it excited delirium. And I just barely got his name from him before he went unconscious. I had taken the handcuffs off of him in the ambulance so that he could be in a better position to breathe. And I tried to make every accommodation that was recommended by the EMTs. And I rode with them to make sure that they were safe. And I put myself in a dangerous position because he was very strong. And with excited delirium, I mean, he was super, super strong. But he was coming in and out of consciousness, breathing very heavy. And it was a dangerous situation for everybody involved. And it was a few weeks later that he passed away. He had some other medical issues. But I remember that early in my career shaped how I thought of suspects. Because when I found out that he died, I was shocked and I was sad. He wasn't arrested even. He was, I took him to the hospital. I had to detain him for his own safety. He was running around on rooftops and talking crazy and trying to get in people's houses, and he's just kind of out of his mind. And he appeared to be on drugs and in excited delirium. So I did what we call MH1, I believe, which is a mental health evaluation. Really, I couldn't arrest him for any crime, but I knew he needed help. So having tried to help the guy, but having to do it against his will and putting myself in danger, at some point he woke up and he attacked my partner, and my partner wrestled around with him, and I happened to have gone to the police car to grab leg shackles. And so I was around the corner and I couldn't hear what was happening. And my partner was struggling for a while, rolling on the ground with this guy who had a lot of strength. And at one point, the guy tried to go from the officer's gun. And as I came back around the corner, I heard him say, "He's got my back strap," or something like that, which is the strap that holds, it's part of the 3-point retention on your holster. And so the fact that this guy, we were trying to help him, but he was going crazy and then putting lives of police officers in danger. And then the EMTs when they arrived. I mean, it's just a crazy situation. So I do know that things can get really crazy. And I do know that people in an emergency situation have to respond and just rely on their training. But sometimes things happen that you never anticipate or were trained for. So there are some outlying things that happen, but it seems as though in this case, because there were officers on scene, and that the officers that were standing there didn't have anything to do except for address the crowd that was gathering maybe, or the bystanders that were filming, and that becomes a danger. That's a situational awareness issue. But if you're at a situational awareness officer safety issue, there's a lot of room between how much that's needed and how much you should be protecting the public. And at some point, that guy's on the ground and he can't breathe, and the guy's not getting off his neck. The officers around, in my opinion, should have gotten him off the ground, told the officer, "We got this," and put him in a blue and white or in an ambulance. And I know that when I was working, there is this crucial moment between when you decide you're going to arrest somebody and when they're in the car handcuffed with the retention systems engaged. It's very, very dangerous time, because the moment they find out they're being arrested is a shock to them, and then if they want to resist or they decide they're not going to jail that day, it becomes real dangerous. And then there's that whole period between when you tell them they're being arrested and when you actually get them in the car. That's super dangerous. So you want to get that as fast as you can. You want them in the car as fast as you can. Once they're in the car handcuffed with the retention bars or seatbelts or whatever, they're a much lower risk to themselves and to other people. And then you can finish your investigation if you need to, but you have to make the scene safe, and part of that is getting them in the car. And the fact that this guy knelt on his neck for so long with officers that weren't engaging, that is one thing that seems like didn't go how it was supposed to go. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because they weren't trained well enough. It could have been that the officer who was kneeling on the gentleman was the senior officer. And it did appear to me that the guy standing around was a younger officer. And just by the way he was standing, I got the vibe that he'd only been in a few years, if that. And that he didn't really know what was going on, that he was just protecting his beat partner. Which it does seem to me like that was the chance. Like that was the backup plan. That was the checks and balances for Mr. Floyd. That even though the officer was kneeling on him, there was a backup, and it should have been that officer to say, hey, I got this. Let's put him in the car. So, although I do not believe that the officer standing around necessarily maliciously committed a crime, I do think he failed George Floyd. And that's sad. And I do think that officer will realize that, and he'll have to live with that. I also don't believe that the officer who was kneeling on George Floyd, Officer Chauvin, I don't believe, from what I saw, I don't believe he wanted to kill George Floyd. So I don't think there was intent to kill him, which is what murder is. I could be wrong. I've heard a lot of rumors, and I've seen some pictures of him like wearing a hat that says "Make Whites Great Again," and I'm not sure if those are fakes or whatever, so I can't really speak to that yet. But I do think that Officer Chauvin did not use the proper use of force. I believe he failed to de-escalate based on what I saw from the video. And de-escalation is one of an officer's most important roles. The difference between a police officer and a civilian, the difference between the burden that police officers bear and what a civilian's responsibilities are is de-escalation. Police officers' probably most important training is the training that they get for de-escalation. And at some point you have to de-escalate a situation, whether it's with what we call verbal judo, which is just your ability to talk someone down and explain and calm, or whether it's physical de-escalation, or both, to where you get a person who maybe is holding a knife and wants to stab you to drop the knife, or you have a person that wants to fight you and has their fists up, and then you talk them down to just standing there and talking a bunch of trash, or someone who's talking trash and wants to fight and is acting aggressive, but you talk them down. It happens every day. It may be our most valuable asset. And so I believe that there was a failure to de-escalate here. I cannot fairly address whether it was appropriate or not, the use of force level that they reached, that Officer Chauvin reached. It may have been appropriate up until the point where he put his knee on his neck. But at some point, that should have been de-escalated. I think I've put my knee on the back of people's neck before when they were resisting. The neck is like a last resort for gaining compliance. but I believe I've done it. I can't remember a time, but it does seem like I've done it. And it's effective because you control the head and you can control the body, essentially. It's just a concept in self-defense and tactics. And so it may have been appropriate that he got to that point. But clearly, to me, the failure to de-escalate from knee on the back of the neck to the point where the man should have been put in the back of the car. That's where the breakdown was, from what I saw. I think that George Floyd didn't have to die. And no matter what he did, fraud or resisting arrest. And I don't know the cause here. I'm not sure if it's because the officers weren't trained enough or if the officers were scared, because fear is a real thing, and I think fear is toxic. Fear can be toxic if it reaches a certain level during a certain situation. And in this case, I'm not sure if fear was the reason. But if you've never been in a fight before and you don't know how to handle yourself and you don't know how to keep yourself calm during a fight and you don't believe in yourself, then you will resort to using tools. The police departments, at least in Honolulu, I know that they encourage the use of tools for use of force. I remember being reprimanded because I got hurt once by a gentleman who attacked me. And I was on duty, and he just charged me and attacked me and some of my beat partners. And I got in trouble. I got reprimanded by my captain because I didn't use my taser. But I remember thinking to myself, oh, I didn't need my taser. Like, I know what I can do with my hands. I know I can defend myself. And I know that if I pull out the taser, that there's a chance that I could lose that taser or miss and be shocking myself, or lose possession of my taser to the suspect. And it was just something I didn't want to get into when I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt like I could handle myself and that I could gain compliance with my hands and my hand-to-hand tactics without going to my tools. So I do know that there is a pressure for police officers to use tools. But I feel like police officers that can handle themselves, that aren't afraid to fight, they use their tools less, it seems. And so I said that to say that I think that it was an indicator throughout my career, people that went to tools right away. Probably weren't confident in their skills. And so I don't know if the officer standing around wasn't confident in his skills, or if the officer who had his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck wasn't confident in his skills. But at some point you should have let that man up and deal with the consequences. If he wants to re-engage a fight with you with handcuffs on, it still is better than him dying. And I don't think someone should die for resisting arrest. I don't think someone should die for fraud. And the guy did die, and it's a sad thing. So it's of my opinion that we don't have the full story yet, but I don't see how the full story redeems the officer involved here. I did only see a small clip, but in that small clip, I see several opportunities for de-escalation, and I see other officers on scene that should have helped. And so my prayers go out to the Floyd family and to the family of the officers involved until the investigation is complete. We don't really know what happened, but either way, A man lost his life, which I don't think is ever a good thing. And officers lost their jobs. And officers may be going to jail. Legally, I don't know the laws in Minnesota, but I don't believe it's a murder situation because I don't believe he intended to kill him. He may have been negligent causing the death. So I do believe manslaughter will probably be the charge, or whatever the equivalent is. There's definitely some what appeared to be misconduct. So it's just really sad. And I'm sorry for George Floyd and for his family. And it's sad because this does increase tensions between the law enforcement community and the African American community, which has always been important to me to be a mediator for. But these are also things that need to be addressed. So although it's a scary time for police and a scary time for the African American community, and a time of friction, I think it has to be explored. I just hope that no more lives are lost, and I hope that the people that are rioting keep the peace. I hope that the thefts stop and that the damage to property stops. But I hope that we do have some type of a forum that we can talk and we can discuss these things. It's a good thing to address. It's just sad that it had to cost a man his life. And I'm weary right now of people that are releasing videos just because I've heard so many people who have written books and they want to get their books out quick and have channels and are just looking for views. And so I wanted to be respectful of that. And I'm not looking for gain here. I truly want to discuss these things, and I want to help the situation. I understand the hatred, and I understand the distrust of law enforcement. And I also understand how difficult it is to be a police officer, and I understand the nuances of when these things happen. So I have compassion for the police officers who risk their lives every day. And I do not deny that there are some bad police officers. There are bad people who are police officers. And there are good people who are just bad police officers. But the overwhelming majority, the vast majority of the police officers that I've worked with or come in contact with are amazing people. Service-minded. With hearts. And would never take an opportunity to kill somebody or to cause them that kind of pain and suffering. So, I hope that we can learn from this, and I hope that in the immediate future, that we can be constructive and we can bridge the gap between what we expect out of law enforcement and what we equip law enforcement to do. The system is broken. It is difficult to be a police officer. It's scary to be a police officer. And it is a thankless job for the most part. And we put them in unfair positions with unfair requirements and unfair responsibilities, with not enough training. And because of political correctness or unions or tenure or seniority, we sometimes don't have high enough standards for training and for fitness. And these are things that I've been preaching for years. I both want to protect police officers because I know how difficult it is, but I want to protect the public because I know that bad things have been happening. They've always been happening. But the things that have been happening recently, I can now take a look at from an outsider's perspective, not being a police officer anymore, but still having the mind of a police officer. I mean, it's only been 2 years, and it was the greatest job I ever had. And I loved my job. So it's a delicate position to be in. So I want everyone to know that right now what we need is compassion, and we need to take a good hard look at the facts, and we need to find the truth, and we need to take actions. We need to reevaluate, rewrite policy. We need to create discussions and create an environment that's not so polarizing. Because the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's not on the fringes. It's somewhere in the middle. And I want to help us get there. Because we need less people to die. We need life. We need life in the police department, and we need life for our communities. So whatever we got to do to bring that life, stopping the deaths, the unwarranted deaths. We need to address things like racism, address things like good old boy systems, and address the institution of law enforcement, the role of the media, and we need to all work together as a team because we're all brothers and sisters, and it needs to stop being us versus them. But it won't stop being us versus them until we can become vulnerable to each other, and without trust there will be no vulnerability. So I hope that this brings some type of clarity. I hope that it causes people to think and to discuss. And I'm willing to take comments and questions, and I'll try to do some live videos and question and answer sessions because I really want to help. So I hope you hear my heart. Because we can do this together. So mahalo for the time that you took to watch this video. And I just want to say aloha.